In the quiet countryside of Bavaria, about an hour north of Munich, there once stood a small farmstead called Hinterkaifeck. Today, the land has been razed and replanted, deliberately erasing any trace of what happened there. But in 1922, this remote farm became the site of one of Germany's most notorious and perplexing unsolved murders, a case that continues to baffle investigators and true crime enthusiasts a century later. The Gruber family had worked this land for generations. Andreas Gruber, a 63-year-old farmer, lived there with his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, her two children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph, and their new maid Maria Baumgartner. From the outside, they appeared to be a typical farming family, but beneath the surface, dark secrets lurked. In the days leading up to the murders, Andreas Gruber noticed strange occurrences around the farm. He discovered footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the farm's machine room, but oddly, there were no footprints leading back. He heard footsteps in the attic above, creaking floorboards when everyone was accounted for downstairs. Keys went missing. Newspapers appeared that no one had bought. These disturbing events troubled Andreas enough that he mentioned them to neighbors, but mysteriously, he never reported them to the police. The most chilling detail? The previous maid had quit 6 months earlier, claiming the farm was haunted. She spoke of strange noises, unexplained phenomena, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, had just arrived at the farm on March 31st, 1922. It would be her first and last day of work. On the night of March 31st, something, or someone, lured each family member to the barn one by one. First was Andreas Gruber, followed by his wife Cecilia, then Victoria Gabriel and her daughter, little Cecilia. Each was killed with a mattock, a tool similar to a pickaxe, with devastating precision. The killer then entered the house, where they found Maria Baumgartner in her bed and 2-year-old Joseph in his crib. No one was spared. But here's where the case takes an even more disturbing turn. The killer didn't flee immediately. Instead, they stayed at the farm for several days after the murders. They fed the cattle, ate food from the kitchen, and presumably slept in the house with the bodies of their victims lying in the barn and bedrooms. Smoke was seen rising from the chimney. The cows were milked. Life on the farm appeared to continue as normal. It wasn't until April 4th, 4 days after the murders, that neighbors began to worry. Young Cecilia hadn't shown up for school for several days, and no one had seen any of the Grubers at church. The postman noticed mail piling up. Finally, mechanic Albert Hoffner arrived to repair a feed-cutting machine and made the horrific discovery. The investigation that followed was plagued by mistakes and missed opportunities. The crime scene was contaminated by dozens of onlookers before investigators arrived. The bodies were beheaded during the autopsy, and the heads were lost during World War II, making modern forensic investigation impossible. The murder weapon was never found. But perhaps the most intriguing aspects of the case lie in the family's history. Years before the murders, Andreas Gruber had an incestuous relationship with his daughter Victoria, resulting in her son Josef. Victoria's husband Karl Gabriel had died in the trenches of World War I, or had he? Some investigators believed Karl might have survived the war and returned to exact revenge on his wife's family. Others suspected he never died at all, but rather deserted and eventually made his way back to Hinterkaifeck. The case spawned numerous theories over the years. Some believed it was a robbery gone wrong, though nothing of value was taken from the farm. Others suspected a vengeful former servant or a jealous neighbor. The most compelling theory involved a local man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, who had been involved with Victoria and might have been Josef's father. He was part of the search party that discovered the bodies and behaved strangely at the crime scene, showing intimate knowledge of the farm's layout and moving through the scene with unusual familiarity. In 2007, students at the police academy in Fürstenfeldbruck reopened the case using modern criminal investigation techniques. After analyzing the historical evidence, they came to a conclusion about the killer's identity. However, out of respect for the perpetrator's living relatives, they chose not to make their findings public. The case officially remains unsolved. What makes the Hinterkaifeck murders so fascinating is not just the brutality of the crimes, but the psychological elements at play. The killer's behavior suggests someone intimately familiar with the farm and its residents. They knew the layout of the buildings, the family's routines, and felt comfortable enough to stay there after committing the murders. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was personal, premeditated, and executed with chilling patience. The idea that someone could lurk in an attic for days, watching a family's every move, is the stuff of nightmares. But that's exactly what appears to have happened at Hinterkaifeck. The footprints in the snow, the missing keys, the unexplained noises, all point to a killer who took their time, studying their victims before striking. Consider the psychological torture the family must have endured in those final days. Andreas Gruber knew something was wrong. He sensed the presence of an intruder, but didn't act on his suspicions. Was it pride that kept him from seeking help? Or did he have some idea who might be watching them, someone whose existence he didn't want to acknowledge? The murder scene itself revealed other disturbing details. The positions of the bodies suggested the killer had called their victims to the barn one at a time. Each person had walked voluntarily to their death, presumably summoned by someone they knew and trusted. The precision of the kills indicated someone with strength and determination, but also someone who knew exactly what they wanted to accomplish. Even more unsettling is the killer's decision to remain at the farm afterward. This wasn't just practical, it was a statement. They claimed the space as their own, living among the evidence of their crimes like a macabre house-sitter. They tended to the animals, ate at the family's table, and slept in their beds. It's behavior that speaks to a deep psychological connection to the place, and possibly a disturbed sense of ownership or belonging. The Hinterkaifeck case also tells us something about rural German society in the 1920s. This was a time and place where people kept to themselves, where family secrets stayed buried, and where the shame of incest and illegitimacy could be more powerful than the fear of a murderer. The isolation of the farm, both physically and socially, created perfect conditions for both the crimes and their concealment. Today, the site where Hinterkaifeck once stood is just another patch of farmland. The buildings were demolished in 1923, perhaps in an attempt to erase the horror of what happened there. The tools from the farm were auctioned off, though many locals refused to buy them, believing they were cursed. The name Hinterkaifeck itself has become synonymous in Germany with the darkest kind of mystery, one where the truth lies just out of reach, tantalizing us with possibilities but never revealing its secrets. 100 years later, the case continues to capture imaginations and inspire debate. What really happened on that remote Bavarian farm? Was the killer a stranger who developed an obsession with the family? A wronged relative seeking revenge? Or someone even closer to home? The answers died with the killer, who almost certainly took their secrets to the grave decades ago. The Hinterkaifeck murders remind us that sometimes the most frightening mysteries are those that remain unsolved. In the absence of certainty, our minds fill in the blanks with possibilities more terrifying than any truth could be. And perhaps that's why this case endures, because it forces us to confront the unsettling reality that sometimes evil doesn't just visit briefly and leave. Sometimes it moves in, makes itself at home, and lives among us, hidden in plain sight.